Hello everyone, I apologize for the long duration of the wait here, but I had a cold and it was really horrific and I've only just now become understandable. So I do apologize. Hello, what did I just say? We'll keep that actually temporarily. I do apologize for the long delay, but I wasn't in any physical condition to be able to effectively upload. But we're back now, so justice is restored. What was I doing? Oh, that's right. We were about to whack our way to Homestead. We were in the final stretch towards Homestead. That's right. Um, honestly, is that really worth it? This is a little bit better, yeah. Just slightly. Okay. So we're going to store our stuff. I didn't sell this for some unholy reason. Okay. And sold. Put this where it belongs. Alright, cool. And off we go. Into the merry blue yonder. And here we go. Off into the wilds. Hello. And ding. Boing. And off we go. This will probably be a short but very intense episode because the path to Homestead from here is pretty damn quick. But there's a lot of enemies that tend to spawn in the area, and the actual boss fight at the end is one of the more intense boss fights you encounter in the game, actually. More because it's one right after the other, so it's like a mini boss gauntlet, which you really don't see anywhere else in the game, interestingly enough. I think the intention here is to kind of have the last stretch before Homestead serve as a kind of testing ground. If you can't handle this area of the game, if you can't make your way to Homestead cleanly, you're probably not going to succeed in the rest of the game. I do think that this was intentional because I've been actually thinking about this recently because my family and I have been playing a lot of this recently. Which is why you also haven't seen a ton of build updates, is because a decent amount of my free time is spent just testing out random things with my family. By the way, I do have an announcement on random things that I'll want to talk about in the near future. I want to grab some more evidence, but it turns out that there is an ability. I'm actually just going to give you kind of like a teaser. Alexstra's Flash Freeze is a little more useful than the community gives it credit for against bosses. I'll detail that more probably in a special episode at the end of the week after I've done a little bit more testing, because I'm not going to just come out here with no evidence, but it is something that I'm going to want to show to you, and I do believe I have accidentally discovered that Alexstra's Flash Freeze is in fact more effective against bosses than what everyone has been believing up until now. But, leaving that aside, I do, going back to this actual section of the game, it is such an intense fight. We have our, like, actual seriously dispersed ground threats with the Aether there. We've seen it before, briefly, but they were all out of the way. We're talking about right after Smuggler's Pass there. I can't remember. Dead Man's Gulch. There is this Aether ground damage field present there, but it's all very out of the way. You have to go out of your way to step on that and actually have it significantly damage you. This is not quite the case here. This is where you start seeing that be in some decently threatening locations where enemies can actually stand in it and be less threatened by you if you're a melee build, because you have the option to just because you don't want to be going into that with them and taking that free damage. So it is introducing that concept in a more serious manner after a nice brief teaser. You've got the double boss fight here, of course, and this guy spawns. I've actually tested this again with family, one of us being a healer focus and the other one just tanking random zombies. This is infinite. He infinitely spawns enemies here. All the bosses do, but all of these guys are really... There's no cap on these guys. Most bosses have some kind of a limit on how many they'll have out on the field, and they rarely surpass that limit. He does not have this, and I think he's the only boss that does not have this besides what's his name at the end of the Ashes of Malmouth content. I cannot for the life of me remember his name, but I don't think he has a limit either. But by that time, usually you have enough abilities, you have enough AoE abilities where that's not a supremely major concern, because you can typically wipe them out in your regular course of fighting him. But with that particular boss there, that's not quite the case. You may not necessarily have as much AoE as you would at the end of Ashes of Malmouth when you're a much higher level. So that becomes a whole different other question at that point. Oops. Wasted that. So, I really do think that this is the point at which, if you have a serious problem with that double boss fight, you're probably too weak to be able to press on much farther, especially since another majorly difficult boss fight is the Dermapteran Queen. She kind of mimics the same idea of of two bosses in a row, but she's a two-stage, but she switches attacks completely, and I think she tests your resistances rather than your offense, because you can very easily fight her alone, but she has a bit of a limit on the minions. She summons the 3 grubs and then the 1 larva thing, the 1 medium-sized larva guy, and that's pretty much all she'll keep out at one time is the 4. And really, it's more about how you can handle individual bosses. I think that double boss fight is more about how you can handle large groups of enemies in succession. But the Dermapteran Queen tests whether or not you can handle individual bosses. And so this whole section from the start of Homestead, from this boss fight at Homestead here, in front of Homestead, that boss fight, all the way to the Dermapteran Queen, I think really functionally serves as a testing ground to basically force you to ask the question, can my build make it all the way to the end? Basically, is what it seems to... That's always generally... I'm actually going to sit and talk about this for a bit, because I've been thinking about this for a hot minute. Because I'm about to end the episode here. I don't want to press on much farther at this point. But this is generally where, if a build is doing bad, I'll abandon it. Right, if I'm testing a build and it's having a rough time getting into Homestead, past the 2 boss fights, or it has a really rough time with the Dermapteran Hive, I drop the build. Homestead basically is the testing ground of, can this build work? And I've had numerous builds throughout history. My history of playing the game, I've had numerous builds that the answer was no. They could not survive the rest of the game, and I just dropped them. Or reworked them completely, which is usually what I did. But sometimes I was so disgusted with the build that I just dropped it completely. I killed the character off, deleted it, everything, and just moved on to something fresh. So, for just future reference, I mean, I had no problems there with those 2. Well, I had very few problems there. I had to do some mild ring around the rosy, but I've definitely had worse, and I've definitely had better builds. So this is a good-ish build so far. Whether I goof it later is entirely up to me. But I will be paying a lot of extra special attention to when I fight the Dermapteran Queen to see how this build handles her. Because at the end of the day, while it's nice and all to be able to fight off large groups of enemies, for hardcore I've noticed it's kind of do or die with the bosses. Yeah, sure, I've died plenty of times to a random mob of dudes. Sure, absolutely. But I know later on in the game, the major threat is going to be from the major bosses that typically populate the late game. So the Demapteran Queen is going to be my test of, can I handle these? Conceivably, right? So with that being said, thank you all very much for joining me. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. And thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours.